Hello, and welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melody Parrish, and I want to thank you for coming and being with us for this moment. I have a very special guest, and Kayla Crane. She is a licensed couples and trauma therapist from Denver, Colorado. Kayla, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
And I love the fact that you're doing relationship trauma and therapy. And you even mentioned EMDR a little bit, which is very interesting. A lot of people don't know about it. I do EMDR as well. But if you can just take the floor and just explain some things that you do, maybe some things, some ways that relationships will have give trauma, and then maybe some strategies or tips for us.
Yeah. Um, so as far as relationships, the the big huge trauma that we see that I think most people would think of in when they think of relational trauma would be infidelity. So I think that's the so sometimes when there's infidelity, after we do the work, the hurt partner when they're ready to move forward, okay, I want to continue this relationship after we've done the work, but there's something that's like sticking with me. There's like a memory or something like that. That's where the trauma processing works well. In addition to that, trauma can be a fight that got bad. It can be something that a partner said that was unkind and hurtful, and it kind of sticks. It could be maybe one night a partner like didn't come home or didn't follow through with a promise. You never know what it could be, but all of them, when it comes to working when they come to work with me, I can pick it up because there'll be stuff that we keep going back to. And they'll say, like that night that you didn't come home. And then we'll kind of talk it through and then it'll come back and it'll come back. And that's usually a sign that it's a trauma and something that we need to process uh, through a traumatic type of therapy, which is you can't process trauma through talk therapy. You have to process it through some kind of experiential therapy, such as EMDR, or there's a few different options like somatic experiencing and uh, IFS, internal family systems. So there's a few ways, but that's where we would kind of take that in those instances.
Okay. Can you explain more about the processing because our listeners may not understand that?
Yeah, yeah. So to process trauma, you need so with EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a mouthful. But so the first thing we do is as it states is desensitize, right? So if somebody experienced a trauma, that means there's going to be triggers. That's what's indicative of it being a trauma. And so we do the work and we desensitize that. So if somebody had, for a random example, if somebody was assaulted on the street and a blue car drove by, perhaps in the future, a blue car could be a trigger. And when they see that, they have an emotional response. Um, and so if we did the desensitization, if it was successful, when a blue car drives by, they wouldn't have that emotional response. That doesn't mean they would forget it, right? That might still make them think of it, it might not, but it's more of a bad memory than a traumatic memory, which means, like I said, it doesn't elicit that emotional response. Our next piece is the reprocessing. So when you experience a trauma, it instills a belief inside of you. So that's actually the trauma is the belief that it creates inside of you. So somebody in a relationship, if there was infidelity, they might come out with the belief that I'm not good enough or I don't deserve love, something like that. So that's the actual trauma piece, is that belief that it creates. And so once we get to the reprocessing part, we take that belief and we try to change it into a more appropriate and realistic belief. Um, so I am worthy of love, or I there isn't something wrong with me. I'm good enough, something like that.
So do you and the client come up with the new belief to replace the other one? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So first, a lot of times people don't recognize what the belief is, the negative belief. So first we go through that and we try to determine that. And then once we get to once we complete the desensitization process, we kind of go through and explore what would be an appropriate um, new belief. So, and realistic. So if somebody was uh, ha- again, like assaulted, and the belief it created was I'm not safe, it wouldn't be realistic to switch that to I will always be safe no matter what, right? Because that's not true. Maybe the belief would be I'm capable of protecting myself, or I have resources that can help me, something like that. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that does. So I know a lot of times people feel like, trauma has to be something big, something powerful, and little things don't matter. Kind of like the sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me rhyme
Mhm.
that you have.
Yeah.
Can you explain or kind of further that thought of the whole expansive trauma and not?
Yeah, that's actually something that is it's important to me because people do have an idea that trauma is a huge word. It has to be some life threatening experience, um, like being in combat or sexual assault, something like that. That's usually people think it's something really big, which, of course, those are traumas, but it can also be something that just kind of sticks with you. So, like I said, in a relationship, it could be one time the partner was upset and said something unkind, right? And that could stick with them. And again, it's that belief that it creates. And so, if the belief was, so if their partner said, um, "I want to leave," I'm going to break up with you, or something like that, the other partner may develop a belief that I'm going to be abandoned, something like that, right?
Mhm.
So it can just be that one thing. You never know what's going to stick with you. And so it's really hard because anything could, and there's not really any kind of science. There's no way to tell. It's just where you are and what's kind of happening. And if it sticks and it either develops or reinforces a belief that that's trauma. Um, I do a lot of like childhood work, inner child work, and stuff like that. And it will stick. People will say, "No, I didn't have any trauma," and then they keep going back to this belief, right?
Mhm.
But but I don't deserve love. But I don't feel like I deserve love. And then we go back and look, and maybe their parent just made a mean comment, or um, like someone, a bully at school said something. Uh,
Mhm.
so you really have no idea. It can be something big, it can be something that seems very, very small. So yeah, I really, hope that stigma changes because I think people don't even consider that maybe maybe some trauma work would be helpful. Um, be- because I think a lot of people do think, well, I haven't had these horrible things, you know. So yeah, and everyone has experienced some form of trauma, all of us. And so a lot of people don't recognize that either. But like I said, it's that all these little traumas, that's where we kind of develop our identity, if
Mhm.
that makes sense, because of those beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been reading the book from by Oprah Winfrey
Mhm.
and Bruce, I
Eckert,
forget.
Bruce Eckert. Mhm.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
one, What Happened to You?
yeah.
And it's just amazing, and they talk about that, how those little things just develop into ideas
Mhm.
and beliefs about yourself. Um, can you explain to us, like, first how that works, and then how we would be able to, like you say, a lot of us don't recognize that. So how we would be able to recognize that or begin to start. Maybe that's the word, begin to start.
Yeah. So, a lot of times the way that I work with clients is, so if somebody says, so I'll go back to the big one just because it's I think a good example of infidelity. Um, I will ask the hurt partner, what does it mean about you that your partner cheated on you?
Mhm.
And eventually we'll get to what it means that I'm not good enough or whatever the belief is. And
Mhm.
so that's a good way of getting to it is asking what it means about you when something happens or you get triggered.
Mhm.
And being intentional about focusing it on yourself because a lot of times you think, oh, it means that they made a but it's really what it means about you because that shows you how you're interpreting it. So that's usually a good way of doing it. And then we usually that it a lot of times the belief does have origins in childhood.
Mhm.
And it's reinforced when the future traumas happen.
Mhm.
And so then, in that instance, I would say, okay, what was the very first time in your life that you remember feeling not good enough? Right. And likely it will be childhood. And once again, then we talk about like that instance, and that'll give us a good idea of kind of where it developed. And also, it'll really help with really nailing down that belief.
Mhm. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. And you're talking about childhood and inner child work and those kind of things. Can you explain that the inner child work a little bit? Because I think it's important for all of us.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it is. And that's another form of like experiential trauma work. And so, um, the way that I'm trained, there's a lot of different ways that people kind of work with inner child. But the way that I'm trained is that we have a wounded child that lives inside of us, and we
Mhm.
have an adaptive child. And when we are regulated, we are in what we call our wise adult or functional adult. So our wounded child will show up till about 4 or 5. And that's the child, as the name implies, that was wounded, right? That's the one that, in an extreme circumstance was abused
Mhm.
or something like that. And however, we all have wounded children. So
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be something big. It's just an example. So if somebody had an abusive parent, the up until 4 or 5, that's the wounding. About 5 or 6 is when our adaptive child is formed. And that's the child that learns to adapt to that, right? And so maybe when, mom or dad was angry or abusive, or maybe they were drinking and that imply like that child had an idea that they were going to be abusive, um, that will result in the child likely being hyper vigilant. So being very cautious and aware of their demeanor, their parents' demeanor, their parents' body language, their tone, because that's how they have to protect themselves, right? And maybe when the parent, when they did sense danger, they would go and hide. And so that's how that child adapted. As we become adults, when we get dysregulated and maybe there's, well, first the hypervigilance will show up in a relationship, often with them asking their partner, "Are you okay? Like, are you mad?" Right? Like they'll notice, like, I mean, the tiniest thing, and they will, kind of address, like, what's wrong? Are you mad? And then perhaps when their partner's angry, or even if there's conflict, even if it's a very um, safe partner, never abusive, you
Mhm.
know, that that person, once they experience that, they come out of their wise adult, and that adaptive child kind of comes out and kind of runs the show. And they're like, wait a second, I know how to deal with this, right? I'm going to go hide or escape. And as an adult, that might look like physically leaving. It might looking like emotionally shutting off. It might look like utilizing an addiction, because that's another form of escape. Something
Mhm.
in that kind of context. They're going to repeat those adaptive behaviors because that's what kept them alive as a child, right? So the work that I do with that is I really help clients to learn how to recognize when they're in that adaptive child versus the functional adult. And then how can we work with this?
Mhm.
Right? And we always honor the adaptive child because they're very smart. They knew how to keep us safe, right? And they did keep us safe. So we're grateful to them. So when we do the inner child work, that is something that we always address. Thank you for keeping me safe. And you don't have to anymore. Now, I have grown up resources that you didn't have as a child, and I can keep us safe in a much more mature way.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. It's so fascinating. I've done inner child work too, and I love talking to people and listening. Um, so these things, it sounds like to me that what you're trying to say is that we need to be more, um, maybe more able to recognize different things about ourselves, but also about those around us, which seems to be a really difficult thing to do at this moment in time in this world. Um, so, is there a way? Because I feel like people don't look at people as a human being, they just kind of, it seems like people want to just move through the day and not be bothered with anything else. So they don't notice things. You don't notice people. You don't notice their emotions, and we don't know how to notice emotions in ourselves
Yeah.
too. So is there a way? I know for me, the way I was able to start learning emotions and what they were and how they felt and what I was feeling was to journal and to write them down. What are some other ways that you've found with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, journaling's fantastic. I have feelings lists or feelings wheels that I've got them all over my office, and I give them to clients all the time because I hear people a lot of times say, "Well, I don't have any feelings," or "I just don't, I don't feel much." Especially men in our society are socialized to not have feelings or emotions, right? They're socialized to believe that the uncomfortable emotions that are appropriate are anger or a form of anger. And so having a list is really helpful. I also often start with like primary emotions, and I'll say, in that experience, did you feel um, pain, joy, love, guilt, shame, anger, fear? And so maybe they'll say, I felt. A lot of times they will go to anger. I felt angry. So if their partner didn't come home when they said they would. So maybe they say, I felt angry. And I would say, put that into words. And they would say, well, we had something planned and they didn't come home. So for me, that would sound like disappointment, right? Which is a form of pain. And so anger often covers up a vulnerable emotion. Um, so if you can look at those primary emotions, and once you get to one, like I said, if you put it into words, that can be really helpful to kind of be able to recognize it a little bit more, that more specific emotion. Um, in addition to that, our bodies, we hold trauma inside of our bodies. And so our physical sensations inform how we're feeling. And so they actually come first. A lot of people don't know that. It takes some practice recognizing it a lot of the time, just because this is how we've lived our entire life, right? Sometimes we don't even notice it. And so really being present, if you're feeling anxious, like taking a minute, closing your eyes, scanning your body, and recognizing what do you feel inside your body. Um, so for instance, I feel tightness in my throat when I'm anxious. And sometimes I won't recognize that I'm anxious, but
Mhm.
I'll feel that tightness in my throat. And I'll say, oh, okay, maybe I'm behaving out of a place of anxiety, right? Instead of like a regulation.
Wow.
So to identify those, and I have people like also with sensation lists because
Mhm.
that can also be hard. So I tell people just anytime you're noticing any kind of emotion, take a minute and just try to recognize any sensation you're feeling and try to kind of keep track of those ones because they're going to be the same. Um, the same, like I will always get tightness in my throat when I'm feeling anxious. That's another helpful way to do that.
Mhm. Oh, I like that. And I really like what you said that anger always covers a vulnerable emotion. I really like that because a lot of us, feel like, especially anger and fear,
Mhm,
that they're so bad and we don't want to feel them. But I feel like you need to feel them to understand yourself.
mhm,
It not necessarily act on them, but just
mhm.
be aware. And,
Yeah.
I don't know if you know Glennon Doyle, if you've read any of her books, but she even talks about, wanting to know if joy could teach her as much as anger had taught her. Um,
Mhm.
so it's interesting that you said that. Um, and how does recognizing your emotions tie into different traumas that you may experience?
Yeah, so, like I said, that, trauma physically lives inside of you. There's a really good book called, The Body Keeps the Score, very well known, and, that's what it's about, that the trauma lives inside of us, and so that's also why we need experiential therapy to
Mhm.
process trauma, because we've gotta get those sensations out. Um, and so when when you are when you experience a trauma, again, it's going to first show up in your body. And there's two different kinds of memories. There's implicit memories and explicit memories. So explicit, I remember getting dressed today. I remember driving to work. Implicit, you don't cognitively remember it. Your body does, though. And so even newborns, even babies, uh, babies even can experience trauma. And even though as an adult you don't cognitively remember that, your body does. So you can still get triggered by something even when it doesn't seem to make sense. You can't connect it to the any kind of trauma, and that's because it's still there, even though you're not maybe cognitively thinking about it. People tell me very often, like, "Oh, yeah, I was in a horrible car accident, but I don't even think about that anymore." But then we're recognizing that they're having triggers. And so, although you're not thinking of it, it's still there. It's still impacting you. And then, as a newborn, our attachment styles are formed, and insecure attachment can form from trauma. And again, it doesn't have to be something huge. Maybe their parent wasn't, you know, always emotionally available. That can be a trauma. So that's kind of how it lives inside of you, if that makes
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that does. So in a relationship, like you said, you know, there was the problem with the parent, the bonding or something. That how can that show up in a relationship?
Oh, I mean, so that's attachment theory, which I also incorporate with a lot of clients. And so, like I said, so ideally, somebody develops a secure attachment, which the parent is always consistently available. Um, a lot of times, like I said, we develop an insecure attachment. Insecure can be insecure anxious, insecure avoidant, or insecure disorganized. The more common ones are avoidant and anxious. Disorganized isn't too common, but so with a anxious attached person, they get anxious when there's conflict, and they it can be almost consuming to
Mhm.
them. They're going to be thinking about it until that conflict is resolved. And they're not only thinking about it, they're usually thinking, what does this mean? Are we going to break up? Who's getting the kids? Like it's going all the way there. And so they feel very, they want to pull their partner closer. Let's resolve this. We need to fix it. Um, the In addition to that, with an anxious attachment, there are core wounds, which are fears of abandonment and rejection. That's what is paired with anxious attachment. Avoidant attachment, when there's conflict, they're going to shut down. They're not going to want to engage. It's just kind of too much, too overwhelming. Um, the core wounds associated with that are failure and rejection. Fear of failure and fear of rejection. Or I'm sorry, fear of failure and feeling worthless. Those are the two with that, and they tend to feel criticized. So uh, it's a very common dynamic, and anxious and avoidant attachment. That's a very common partnership. And so what happens is the anxious partner is trying to pull the avoidant partner in. That results in them shutting down more. They continue to keep trying to pull them in. The way they're doing that is perceived by the avoidant partner as criticism. That's consistent. And they feel that criticism, and that creates shame, and they shut down, right? And so it's I tell people, we can do the trauma stuff is the why.
Mhm.
It's, the why we're having the conflict. And then the attachment piece is how we're having the conflict. And
Oh.
so this is how you're dealing with that.
Mhm.
And that is how, that shows up in all relationships,
Mhm.
family, friends, work, not just romantic. And so I like to incorporate that kind of work because a lot of times people will come in and say, they're shutting down because of me. I'm doing something wrong. When in reality, this is just what they do. This was developed as adaptive behavior as a child, and this is just what they do. And so instead of resisting against that and trying to change that partner because they're probably not going to, how can we work with it, right?
Mhm.
How can you take space in a healthy, appropriate way? Or
Mhm.
how can the anxious partner, pull back a little bit in a healthy, appropriate way that feels safe and comfortable to both,
Mhm.
and then come back when both are regulated.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and can you tell us more about how the idea of, well, it's not what you're doing, but it's how can we work with it? Because you're not going to change. Because I feel like so many people that have had trauma, they want to change to be this supposedly good or supposedly normal, which I don't think any of us know what that is, but we still want to do that and change to be that. So how can we kind of work with things like that?
Yeah. So the trauma work is really helpful when those behaviors are. So when you do the trauma work, you can do those things more appropriately, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
you can pull back and take space versus avoiding and escaping.
Mhm.
Um, or you can, that anxious, you can reach out to your partner in a healthy way, but not like that desperation. And when that need is not met, not getting your partner closer, you'll be able to better kind of cope with that versus it really like taking you out. Does that make sense? The difference there?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's interesting. That's a way of like us regulating our
Mhm.
reactions to
Yeah.
things. And that's in a nutshell, that's what working with trauma is. Is that correct? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, learning how to regulate, having the ability to regulate,
Mhm.
right? So if you have that PTSD, it's not going to feel safe to regulate. You're not even going to be kind of online to know how to regulate. You're just going to respond, how do I protect myself? That is the only thought you will have when you get triggered. How to protect myself? How can I stay safe? Um, and so being able to kind of, like I said, process the trauma, desensitize it, you won't have that, in a lot of circumstances when you're not actually in danger. Maybe you and your partner got into a small argument over, the dishes or something like that, right? You're not going to get triggered and say, oh my gosh, this is dangerous for me in
Mhm.
some way because this person has emotionally hurt me. They're not safe. So it's dangerous. I need to do whatever I need to do to stay safe. You'll better be able to say, okay, this is, I'm upset, right? And hopefully it's not so easy, but hopefully you can also keep in mind those core wounds, right? E- okay, maybe here I might be feeling like I've failed in some way. And so you can kind of hopefully challenge that. Wait, have I really failed because I didn't come home on time? Or did I make a mistake? So that's kind of the how that works.
Yeah. Oh, that's good information. Um, so how could we maybe work on the regulating these emotions and starting to understand ourselves. I guess maybe I don't know. I like to do meditation and different things like that. Um, but what would you suggest for people, let's just say for people that don't have a lot of time, because everybody's always in a hurry, always in a rush. Eh, da, 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 da. So how could we do that in a little short amount of time, just something every day, or how to ground ourselves in a short amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, meditation is also, I mean, m I love meditation. Um, that's better as almost like not preventative, but proactive, because meditation, even if you, just practice like 10 minutes a day, it's so significant, and it gives you a little tiny window to think before you act, right? And maybe you think, "Oh, do I wanna do this?" Right? And then or maybe you think, "I'm upset, I'm going to walk away and go journal and try and figure this out," or, "I need a break," something like that. Um, so it can be really helpful proactively. Um, in the moment, those sensations are really, really helpful, right? Recognizing what am I feeling in my body? How what is what does this sensation mean for me? And then kind of working from that air, that piece, working there, have that tell you kind of what's going on. Also, it's gonna be a pattern that, especially in terms of a relationship, there's gonna be a pattern into how you operate. And so, like for clients, I'll get very specific. When
Mhm.
there's a fight, what happens? And they'll say, somebody says something, and then what do you do? And then what do you do? And what do you do? I get very specific, and
Mhm.
because that's their pattern. That's likely not just that fight. That's what they're do. And so, reflecting on that kind of gives you some clues
Mhm.
when, because it's hard to think of that when you're not regulated, if you don't already kind of have that, like the groundwork on how you typically operate in a relationship. But it will give you clues once you kind of already establish, okay, this is what I do when I feel.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's important. So it sounds to me like you're saying it's important for us not just to know ourselves, but to also know our partners or any relationship. We should just know who that person is. Does that make things easier?
Definitely, and that's why I do, like, the trauma work in the couples
Mhm.
session, because, even if your partner they think they know, even if you think you know, sometimes you don't really understand, kind of like how deep it goes. And so, again, when you're dysregulated, if your partner already has done the work with you and has seen it, it will make more sense to them, right? Oh my gosh, my partner often goes to, well, probably always goes to feeling rejected when there's any kind of conflict. And that might be what is happening right now, especially when there's a like disproportionate response. It doesn't really make sense. Something that's a clue that you're responding to something that's not right in front of you. You're responding to something from your past.
Mhm.
And so I tell people, like, if your partner responds in a way and you're like, what? Where did that come from? Likely they're responding out of that adaptive child. They're triggered, the trauma that's being activated in that moment. And so their partner can help them. And we discuss it in our sessions, like what would feel comforting to you in that moment, right? If you tend to go to rejection, maybe in that moment when your partner sees that you're so upset, maybe they can say, hey, maybe you're feeling rejected right now. That can be unrealistic to do if it's in the middle of a fight, right? So sometimes they do have to take a few minutes and then come back. to it and say that, but there's not always that's not always the case. Some people do have the ability once they've seen like the inner child work and how deep it really goes. Sometimes when there's a conflict and they recognize it, that'll kind of like they'll go into that empathy piece and want to help their partner and say, "Hey, it looks like you're feeling rejected. I love you. I'm not going to leave, or I want you." Whatever they feels good, which again we establish in our sessions.
Oh, I see. So, with one last thing, I did want to ask, how would you suggest that maybe we could resolve conflict in our relationships, but in any relationship as well? Just what do you recommend?
Well, if you're in the midst of conflict, the best thing you can do is take a break, take a time out. And that's not avoiding. What you do is you always have to set a time. So if you just say time out and leave, that's going to be very uncomfortable for that anxious attached partner. Um, if you say time out, we'll come back to this in 2 hours. The first few times they're going to be uncomfortable. But then when you see your partners coming back at that time, it's going to feel a lot safer in the future to, okay, now I can give them their space because I know they're not avoiding, they're not escaping, they're taking a break to get regulated. Because it's oftentimes it's not realistic to be able to use the skills that you have when you're in the middle of a blow up, right? And so I say, whoever recognizes it's become unproductive, call the timeout, set the time, go take a break, and whatever you've got to do. Journaling's really great to do during that time. To it can journaling can kind of give you a outside perspective a little bit, so that's where it becomes really valuable. Or maybe you meditate during that time, maybe call somebody, maybe you take a nap, exercise, whatever you need to do to calm down. And then you come back and talk about it when you're more regulated.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. What if sometimes conflicts will happen and you walk away, it's not resolved, and you just stew over it. So how can we help, or how can you help us settle that kind of
Mhm.
conflict?
Yeah. So, you know, when you come back to it, then you communicate how you're feeling. And so you instead, if you said, when this happened, I was really feeling lonely, or you get really specific with how we're feeling in that time. And your partner responds to how you're feeling, not why you're feeling that way.
Okay.
And that's the part, that's how you validate even when you disagree. And that's incredibly valuable because otherwise you just get stuck. And so I teach people all the time, like, stop worrying about who's right or wrong. You're not, you're likely not going to convince your partner they're wrong and you're right. Right? It's going to just be, you're going to keep going back and forth until somebody finally gives up. Okay, fine, right? And so you just take that out and you just focus on, I felt really lonely when this happened. And then their partner, I help them with that by saying, have you ever felt lonely for any reason at all? And of course I have. And so say what that was like. And you validate that way. And they'll say, okay, I hear you felt lonely. Um, I imagine maybe that was kind of scary or confusing. Maybe you were even feeling like you'd been abandoned, or, you just try to relate. And was that how it was for you? And then your partner can say, um, yeah, it's just like that. Or they can say, no, but it was like this. And so even if you get it wrong, it's really meaningful because at least you're trying and it's demonstrating that you care. Right, and then you have that conversation, and then when your partner then, the other partner at another time can say, "Hey, are you open to hearing my experience?" Not at that time, but, at another time, then "Are you open to hearing my experience of that?" And then that's when you can kind of address that, "Okay, even though I was late, it wasn't my intent to hurt you or to make you feel lonely, and kind of where can we go from here?" And that piece.
Yeah. So, in other words, it's like a continuing conversation. It isn't just one and done because a lot of people feel that way. You know,
Mm.
they feel like, okay, I'm having this problem. Okay, let's talk about it, and then it should be fine. And that's the final thing. It's done. But you're saying that we need to continue that conversation and kind of stretch it out a little bit.
Well, you don't need to. Some people feel okay when, okay, I validated my partner. They feel better. I'm okay. It doesn't really matter for them, me to tell them my perspective. Sometimes people say, okay, they interpreted that, you know, definitely not the way I wanted them to, right? And I really want them to know that that's not what I meant. When you're validating the partner, if you say, "I'm so sorry. I hear that you were lonely, but that's not what I meant." That's invalidating. So you're kind of like, and so that's why later on, if it's really important to you or you think it's important to your partner to understand why you did that or something like that, then, maybe later in the day or the next day, maybe you ask, "Hey, are you open to hearing my experience?" And then you share, and then hopefully that's resolved. If it continues to come up, that means it's not resolved. And
Mhm.
we've got to, it's either left a trauma or just whatever their partner said didn't land, whatever it was. But that's a clue when it keeps coming up that there's something still here.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And uh, you know, we're running out of time. I could talk to you forever about this and just ask questions. You're such a resource of information. And I want to thank you so much for coming. And if there's anything that you can leave our listeners with um, now, what would you leave us with?
The trauma is like you can you don't it's not a life sentence, right? Things can be different, even if it was a childhood trauma. Um, it's not just going to be like that. It doesn't have to just be like that forever. Don't have to live with those triggers and those negative beliefs. You can work on it. It's possible. People can heal from trauma.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful thing because I think sometimes people feel like, oh, my life's over. This is just how I'm going to be. I'm
Yeah,
going to be anxious all the time. I'm going to be miserable, but it doesn't have to be that way, like you say.
not hopeless.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Kayla, I want to thank you so much. And you're more than welcome to come back anytime and just discuss these things. I think it's very important for people to know, especially about couples and relationships and those kind of things, because I don't think we talk about those traumas enough.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to remind everybody that, you don't have to suffer alone. So please reach out to someone.